Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. I've got Keith Williams here, Dave Honorato. You guys don't know Keith. Keith is a friend of mine of 30 years. He's in town visiting, and the three of us were just hanging out, so I said, let's make a video. We were actually talking about the most influential rock band of all time. And it's not the Beatles. We came to that decision, or at least I came to that decision. And we're going to talk about who the most influential rock band of all time is. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess right off the bat, to me, there's only one band that really kind of comes to my mind every time I think about this, and it's the Yardbirds. And it's because of all the bands that were spawned from that band. Obviously, the guitar player lineup is iconic, legendary. You can't get any more, you can't get any better than what they had. So there's a few other bands right behind them, but if I had to choose one, yes, the Yardbirds, hands down.
Yeah, it's that they came through that band. And I was saying to Dave right before we went rolling here, if they didn't come through that band, then all these other bands never would have happened in the way that they did. Well, and that's why.
Yeah. Let's talk about who was in the Yardbirds. There's people on here that are saying, well, who are the Yardbirds?
Well, right off the bat, you had three of the biggest rock guitar players of all time. You had Eric Clapton, and then you had Jeff Beck, and then Jimmy Page. So the holy trio went right through that band. And I think the coolest thing about it was every time there was a different guitar player in that band, the band did change quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And so there's almost three different bands in one band in a very short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 years.
So what do you think about what people say, well, maybe, what about Hendrix?
Oh, well, Hendrix was his own entity. To me, Hendrix was the alien, okay? If you ask any of those guys, they're going to say the same thing, because Clapton, Beck, all of those guys who went to go see Hendrix when he arrived on shore, Townsend, they were all like, we're out of a job, because we can't, who is this? We don't even, where do we start, And at the time, Clapton was God, was the thing. So,
yeah.
So, well, as you said, if Clapton was God, well then...
Right.
Well, and in a way, Hendrix sort of lit a fire under all of those guys.
Yes.
I mean, they went home and cried into their wine for a night.
Yes.
And then the next day, they got up and shedded. Because they're just like, well, what do I have to say if that guy can do that all night?
And right there, not only that, but I mean, Hendrix made all of those guys that much better.
Yeah.
So I actually said before we started the video, I was telling him this idea of a video, if Clapton is God, then who was Jeff Beck? And that led us into this thing of you're deciding that the Yardbirds were the most influential rock band of all time because of all the bands that they spawned. I mean, you can there's a direct lineage.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Clapton's important things.
Right.
He went right from there into Cream.
No, he went to Mayall.
Oh, he went to Mayall, that's right.
Yeah.
Then he went to Cream.
And then he went to Cream.
Then
had
Delaney Dominoes.
Derek Dominoes, Delaney and Delaney and...
Delaney and Bonnie.
Yes.
Bonnie and Delaney, yeah.
Yes,
Right.
And then he had a solo career for, till the present. So.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, to a great extent, going over to Mayall, and the sounds that he did with Mayall were reactions to what he was asked to do.
Yes.
And he was always looking for the most authentic blues unit.
Yeah.
And in a way, he kind of never got there.
Yeah.
But by not going there, he ended up doing these incredible things that completely changed the music.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody talks about a Bluesbreaker amp and a Les Paul to this day, and how it was recorded and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That was a reaction to the time he was in the Yardbirds.
Yeah, exactly.
And the next step, the Cream thing, was like they promised one thing, and they delivered something completely different. And again, he rebelled. But right.
And then the greatest thing I always thought was great about Cream was there was two different bands. You had the studio band, then you had the live band.
Right.
And so much like the Yardbirds, they did too. They even live, they extended everything, so they weren't just 2-minute songs all the time. They actually especially when Beck got in the band and some other a little bit later, but
well, that kind of comes back to a talk I had done earlier this week about improvising versus writing out your parts, and it's not like people in the 60s were improvising all the time. The Beatles, the Stones. No. Well, Stones improvised their solos, but as soloists, the Beatles, a lot of their stuff was worked out, with the exception of things like the jam on the end from Abbey Road. They had plenty of things that were improvised.
That was years and years later, though.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're talking about a time when 3 minutes would be radio death. You're talking about 2 minute and 38 seconds tunes. That was a long tune.
Yeah.
Right.
So, well, let's talk about Jimmy Page next. About what where he went after that, and what he was doing before with the studio work that he did before the Yardbirds.
He was a studio guy who did a lot of Joe Meek stuff early on, and then he started the Yardbirds, got into that. Was actually the bass player for a little bit in the Yardbirds. He wasn't just the guitar player. So he kind of did his multifaceted thing in the Yardbirds, and then there was a brief period where Beck and Jimmy were in the same time, and one was playing bass, one was playing guitar, which I think is great because that just shows you, how those guys were thinking. They were like, okay, well, I don't have to be the guitar god. I'll play bass, you play guitar, whatever makes the band great, or good, and we can move on. So, and I'm sure during all of that time, those guys were so in and out, and everything was kind of happening and becoming. So there wasn't any set, parameters necessarily, because all the psychedelic stuff just started kind of coming in, and I think everybody was just sort of like it was a little bit of a free for all, chaotic thing,
Well, and it's easy to forget how small a scene it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what your story about playing bass and playing guitar in the band at the same time, it's like there aren't that many guys to go around that were playing at a level and even had that knowledge. Or like the three of us hanging out is talking about things that other people maybe wouldn't immediately be interested in having a conversation because they just haven't done the reading. They haven't done the research. Right. These guys were in exactly the same place. They all sat around and listened to the same records. And those were the places in town where people congregated. Like, oh, this guy had this amazing record collection. Yeah. Everybody went there. And then those people were like, well, we're the ones who should play the music together. That's where it came from.
Well, it's interesting to me. We were talking about the strengths of each of the three guitar players. Because you had Jimmy Page, that was an incredibly gifted writer and arranger, producer. And
player of parts.
Right. You had Jeff Beck that had such a unique style. I mean, out of the three, he had the most unique soloing style. I don't think there's any question
across
about
his
that.
entire career.
Across his entire career. Yeah. And then Eric Clapton was a great singer, songwriter, and guitar player.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And even today, I mean, of the solo careers of all of those guys, Clapton obviously was the most successful in the pop world, But I think the thing with Clapton was, I think, as we were talking about before, he was such a purist, diehard blues guy that he kind of had to get all that out of the system. And then you see how, like in the early 70s, he totally went the other way a little bit. He got very acoustic. He got very the J.J. Cale Tulsa connection and all that.
Yeah, the post-country moment. And Delaney and Bonnie, right.
So, he kind of went off in a completely different direction for a long time. Where Beck obviously went off into the stratosphere. He just continued where he was really wanting to go.
Where he's still going.
Which will never end.
Always his own direction.
There is no end to that. And then obviously Page, there's, Led Zeppelin. I mean, it's, how do you... He covered everything.
How do you quantify Led Zeppelin's influence?
It's at this point, it's beyond legendary. It's almost like, it's like we're talking about the jazz greats. You just, that one band just changed everything. Yeah. And whether you want to admit it or not, it just changed everything.
Well, and an amazing part of it is,
and it still does.
They weren't there very long.
No,
kind of like the Miles Davis Quartet, where people blew through the band. Yes. They'd be there 10 months. And they'd be off like Coltrane, off on his own, changing the music completely, sort of in the same way, sort of bridling at the constraints that they'd created for themselves in the Yardbirds, only to bust out on their own and then become these fully fledged, very different artists outside of that band.
Right.
Which is an incredible thing to see, transpire.
Yeah.
Why though? What was the influences? If you think about each of the players' influences, you talk about Clapton. About his influences versus...
Well, Clapton, like I said, was of all three of those guys, was obviously a diehard blues guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he said numerous times that he said, I just wanted to be Robert Johnson.
Yeah.
That was my, catalyst. I think, Clapton was pushed in a lot of different directions after that whole scene started, after Cream. Obviously, they went through the roof, and they were international band after that. They weren't just in England. And you can see how he changed with that. He kind of took that to the hilt, and then figured I can't do any more in this, and that's actually why they ended Cream, because they were all like, well, we're at the top. How can we top this? So they kind of just said, okay, we're just going to disband, which was unfortunate because I think given some more time and maybe some time off the road, they actually probably could have done some more stuff and maybe even done some other things that would have been just as good as what they left. But like most great bands of that period, 1 or 2, 3 years, it came and went, was like a flash, and what they left was so impactful that they didn't need a long career in that band because it's still ridiculously, great today. So I think Clapton's thing for me that I always loved about Clapton was he always went back to his roots no matter what he did.
Mm-hmm.
There was always a heavy blues-based thing no matter what he did.
Right.
Even in the most slicked pop-out 80s stuff with Phil Collins, he's still, if you listen to the solo bits or stuff, it's still obviously Clapton, and he's still playing the same Freddie King stuff that he wanted to play when he was 18, which I love, and he made it work. He had a career in every decade, if you really think about it, and then he came back with a solo record, unplugged, and
in
did
the
it all
early
again.
90s. That was, maybe his most successful selling record.
Oh, I think it was. So he, as far as an artist, I think the main thing makes him last so long, or the longevity, is he always seems to bring it back just to the basics. He knows he can take it out so far, but he still is always him. It's like any great player. You hear 3 notes, you're like, yeah, that's Clapton. And he never changed that. He always had that no matter what.
It was interesting when I was doing the videos on the rock guitar, 70 79, or the first one 1929 through 69, and then 70 through 79, and I had Jeff Beck clips in there. And I was talking to my brother, and he goes, so who was the best player in the video out of all those guitar players? And I said, Jeff Beck, right? I'm not counting Robert Johnson. I'm not counting the early blues guys. I'm talking about the rock guys.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yes.
The rock guys. And he goes, yeah, for sure. Like, no comparison, right? And Jeff Beck his playing has always been so original.
Yeah.
Clapton wore his influences on his sleeve.
Yes.
Page to a certain extent, but Page really was, had many more influences outside of. He had more eclectic influences more Celtic music and
Page was he had a skiffle group. So he came from a lot of very different background right off the bat, I think, than Clapton did. And then Beck, Beck is obviously he jazz was a big
thing. He influenced so many jazz players and fusion players. Yeah. Every fusion player was influenced by Beck, I think.
Yeah, especially the 70s. Those records, even today, those records are the catalyst. You put Blow by Blow, Wired, any of those. You could, if that was put out today, you'd still be like,
mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's just like that's it. And I think the greatest thing about his playing too, he's such an innovator, but he does know when to still rein it in, and he plays like a blues player, even when he's going completely gonzo out the door for the stratosphere. He still has his roots and he keeps them.
Well, I think that his playing, he has more control of the guitar in a way.
Yeah.
Because of his mastery of the whammy bar, for example. He's able to do things. When you think of Clapton and you think of Page, that doesn't come to mind necessarily. That all the different effects that he spawned that so many people use today. That used them from the 80s on, really, or 70s on.
Yeah. And like you said, he can do the crossover thing. I was sitting in my car waiting for my son to finish skiing or something, and I put on Goodbye Pork Pie Hat, and you're speechless. You were running out of words. You run out of words.
You do.
When you're talking about Clapton, when you're talking about Beck, you're talking about his approach. And he would just cross genres and go, well, I'm not going to kid myself that I'm going to solo over these changes. I'm just going to solo over blues changes in the middle of this tune. But when I'm playing this melody, boy, I'm going to have your attention.
Yeah.
And he absolutely does. And it's just what you said. It's the mastery of the note and bending the notes around the notes.
His melody, when he plays covers, when he is he sticks to the melody, but he is able to shape it in such a unique way. Every note, it's not only the beginning of the notes, but it's the end of the notes too. And I always say that's the real mark of the great player. I mean, all those guys are great at that. That's actually part of blues.
But no, Beck definitely. I mean, a perfect example. His '80s cover of "People Get Ready."
Right.
Very straight ahead song. He didn't go really super crazy on it, but that song, even with the Rockman tone, a Jackson with a Kaler on it, and a drum machine, you listen to it and you're still like, that's still incredible. I mean, he still floors me, you know. And it's
and I always thought one of the interesting things about that, he's absolutely got a vocal tone.
Yes.
There's a vocal thing to his playing, and what
Yes.
you're describing is that vocal inflection that he's doing with the guitar. Rod Stewart's not even doing that on that cut.
No.
Right.
It's like he sings as flat as you can go. He's lucky to hit the notes. He's just getting there.
Yeah, and Beck's the one that's
and
just
Beck is like soaring over the whole thing. He's playing at the most vocal version.
Right.
It's like Stewart's just stating the melody,
like,
and he's
crowd
and
layout.
Yeah, exactly.
a perfect example.
No, lay back.
When I bought that record as a teenager, I remember, you know, because I was a huge diehard Beck fan, and the record before that was There and Back. And
Right.
so, which was a compute. I mean, that was completely a fusion record, basically.
Yeah.
So when that came out, it was like, oh man, you know, first I'm seeing like Pink Jackson on the front of Guitar World, and I'm going, okay, well he could pull it off because he's Beck. And then I heard, you know, then I start seeing he's got Donny Osmond singing a track, and he's got like, and I'm just going, oh man, you know. So, but I heard, you know, I saw the video for the People Get Ready, and I was like, I don't care if the rest of the record is a doormat, I'm going to buy it because of that song alone. And
And he's playing his Esquire on that, right? I mean, on the video. Playing his
yes,
Esquire
but it was
in the
even
video.
funnier because he's got swaggy bar stuff.
Right. It's like, okay, you're holding your Esquire. Is it plugged in? It's the 80s.
Right.
It's the
Yeah,
80s.
it looks cool.
It's
Sweet. Yeah, I think it was because it was black and white and it looked better. Probably.
I want my MTV moment.
There
I
you
don't have to
go.
worry about the guitar being plugged in.
And so that in itself is just like all of three of these guys. They all, to me, the reason I love them so much is because they play like singers. They play like a horn player.
Right.
Yeah.
They are so lyrical. They are so melodic. Even when they're going off the rails, it makes sense, and it's musical, I think the best thing about all of these three of these guys, even when they're just being sort of self-indulgent, I don't get tired of them.
Yeah.
I don't feel like, well, I'm just going to do this to show off. I never got the feeling that any of those guys were really showing off. I think they were just so into that moment. You know, even the longest Cream jams and some of Beck's stuff.
They're always playing melodies.
When you watch Jimmy Page listen to the video that I love of him listening to his, you know, he pulls out he has his record collection. He's listening to music. And I can't remember if he's listening to Link Ray or something, but he's just is so into the music. You can tell he's just
Still.
Yeah.
It's that piece from It Might Get Loud. Where he's
Yeah.
doing it, right?
Yeah.
And he just is so immersed, and that's just.
And he clearly is bringing that to
all those
melodic moments on the solos. Yeah. We were talking earlier about how Clapton really probably had the longest career as a writer. You know, sort of Page hit the scene, gigantic explosion of influence, and then not so much later.
Well, he had his 80s.
Yeah, he had some solo records, Outrider, and he did the Page Plant thing and the Coverdale Page thing, and all that, which, you know, we all know was just a rehash of him trying to do what he did in the 70s, and that's fine, you know. But yeah, I'd say as of late, obviously he's not been, you know, doing a whole lot as far as music. I know he did a lot of scoring and stuff too. He did some stuff for like Death Wish movies and some weirdo stuff. But yeah, I'd have to say Clapton for, you know, his.
Which is interesting because that's kind of the opposite of where he was coming out of the Yardbirds.
Yes, exactly.
He's like, okay, I have a few dollars together. I'm going to buy a cherry red Freddie King 335, as the British like to say.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy my ultimate blues guitar right now. Goes into the next band hoping to do the ultimate blues thing, and then ends up doing the Blues Breaker Marshall, completely different direction.
Yeah.
He never ends up doing the plan, you know?
Yeah, not really. I mean, and in his next band, Blind Faith, was a completely different.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
that
right.
was a whole nother
We
band.
didn't even talk about Blind Faith.
Yeah,
Little
that
Steve,
was, you know, definitely a left turn from what he was doing, and it was unfortunate. I love that record. That's one of my favorite records.
Yeah,
and it's unfortunate that they only lasted one record because that was an amazing band. I think it was too much expectations on him at the time, but there's some stuff in that record though that's just phenomenal.
Well, and again, it's a huge writing moment.
Yeah,
at the beginning of his career, this big, writing moment where he's
Yeah.
doing all these incredible tunes with Winwood.
Yeah,
who was so much younger ridiculously.
Yeah,
young,
and you know, I mean, those. I know for a long time, you know, Clapton didn't want to sing, and that was his main thing. He was like, I did, you know, and he kind of got thrown into it, and then he really came into his own.
Yes,
with that. And that's really where you saw his writing.
That's
really,
where it was.
Go skyrocketing. So,
okay, I'm going to throw in a non sequitur here. There's a couple people in the comments section that accuse me of not talking about Stevie Ray Vaughan. Okay, so I want to take a minute to talk
that is a non sequitur.
To talk about Stevie Ray Vaughan. Well, we're sitting here. It just occurred
You're going
to
back
me.
to Jimmy now.
Well, I'm
in a way.
People think that I don't like Stevie Ray Vaughan. I love Stevie Ray Vaughan because I didn't include Stevie Ray Vaughan in my rock guitar videos because I think of him as a blues guitarist, and that's probably. That was probably not right of me to do that.
Personally, I think you're right. I don't consider. Yes, can he cross over into rock? Of course.
Yeah.
Where he really did his thing was blues. It was heavy, amplified blues.
Yeah, right down to his tone.
You know, I mean, and his brother
all the way to the ground.
was too. I mean, you know, his brother was in the Fabulous Thunderbirds, who actually had some bigger songs than Stevie ever did,
right?
And they were still straight up sort of a
blues-based pop songs.
Yeah, you know. So, well, Stevie Ray Vaughan, I could talk about that for an hour. I mean, well, from a lot of angles, but because I was a huge fan and I saw him many times, and actually I knew. Really? I was good friends with Cesar Diaz, who was his tech for a long time, and so
John Mayer's tech now.
You know, it's you know, I could definitely talk about it if you want to. If you want to take it out, I mean, you know, but I think you're right though. I don't think he's a rock player per se. It's like saying, is Hendrix a rock player?
I love Stevie Ray. I just haven't talked about him.
Yeah.
I didn't have him in those because he wasn't in my 1980 to 89 video of rock guitar. I was focusing on because I named it the Guitar Heroes.
Yeah,
implying these were the shredder guys of the 80s.
Well, I mean, he could definitely be in the 80s,
and he could. I mean, he had
obviously
incredible chops.
You just need to blue.
Well, I just knew do an SRV video and it's proper.
And as you're talking about that, I think of SRV sort of in the category with Beck because we were just talking about how Clapton and Page are these writers, and we're kind of talking about their rhythm tones, but also just the riffing that they wrote and the way they played it. They were clearly thinking of building songs. And I don't think of Beck that way at all. And I certainly don't think of SRV that way at all. I don't think of Stevie Ray as that. He's writing in a blues formula and doing incredible technical things with the guitar. Right. And kind of that same, people had that same reaction to him that people had to Jimmy, understandably. Right. A lot of sharing there.
Yeah. To Jimi Hendrix.
That's what I'm saying, to Jimi Hendrix. Sorry, to Jimi Hendrix.
But I mean, here, perfect example, I mean, you know, SRV was debuted on Bowie's stuff.
Right.
And all he did was play Albert King licks at the end of Let's Dance. And because I remember hearing it as a kid and being a huge Albert King
and you thought it was
Albert
Albert
King.
And
I was like, no, I literally thought, okay, who's playing Albert King? Because it was verbatim.
Right.
And
every lick.
Verbatim.
Right.
You know,
if it was a digital age, you'd think they'd lifted it and placed it, right? But it wasn't.
No, way
it was
before
the tape
that.
age,
way before that. So I was like, all right, well, who's that? You know, I know it's not Earl Slick and it's not his normal guitar players in that band, and so
and some people complained when I did David Bowie, What Makes This Song Great, and I did Let's Dance, and I really did it because I mean I'm a massively big Bowie fan, but I wanted to play the solo the Stevie Ray track and just hear it by itself. Because I think it's so great.
That's an epic one. Stevie Ray guys.
Yeah. No, but I think look, we could definitely do a video about Stevie Ray, man. That's to not say that he wasn't important is ridiculous because everybody who owns a Strat now under the age of 35
everybody
who plays blues,
right? Yeah.
He's that generation.
Dave, how much would a tube screamer be worth if Stevie Ray hadn't
$75? And when we had reissues of it, no.
Would there be $400 ones?
No.
Would Ben Ram be doing one with? No, they wouldn't.
No, of course not.
Absolutely not.
I mean, really, that was defined. The price of those things. The one that I bought from you that disappeared. But that was really because of him.
Well, no, that's not one. You have a few around here.
I do.
There's an 808 or something.
Yeah, but definitely no. That he like super reverbs for a long time went way through the roof because of that.
Yeah.
Tube screamers, fuzz faces, original Vox was, and 60 Strats. I mean, he really helped that late 80s Strat boom come back because they were dead. And I was doing vintage guitar at the time with my dad. We would go to the shows, And it was Strat mania. Everybody wanted a Strat in the 80s. Nobody would touch a Les Paul. 335, all of that was dead because that was all considered, well, that's 60s stuff, 70s. You know, everybody wanted a Strat. So, and he was right at that forefront. And, I mean, he was leading the pack of, like, you talked about Strats. It was him and Hendrix and maybe Trower and a few other guys. But Stewart, he brought that back.
Yeah, the shadow was so long, though. I remember reading an interview with David Grissom where he was talking about how he moved to Austin and he had a Fiesta Red Strat. And he showed up someplace and they're like, a Strat? Really? You know, Stevie Ray Vaughan is here. That's right. You can't show up. And he like literally went out and like put a Strat in the closet and started playing PRS.
And dude, and Grissom's no slouch.
No,
man.
absolutely.
I mean,
like,
dude.
It's nothing to apologize for.
No.
And he's like, everybody in town was slinging a Strat and trying to do the SRV thing, and he's like, I can't make a dent in this market.
Yeah, because you had SRV and you had Eric Johnson, and that was they sealed the deal for Strats in the 80s.
Especially there.
Especially there, and talk about stylistically different, the two of them. They covered the whole gambit.
Completely, yeah. I mean, you know, and there again, I mean, Eric Johnson's another one who just, as we were talking about the three holy grail of that's where he worshipped. You know, I mean, if you listen to Eric, I mean, he right off the bat, his tone is instantly Clapton.
Right.
You know, and then he's got obviously the Hendrix stuff.
Totally.
He does the weird tuning stuff, even Eli Page, and then he's a Beck fanatic because you can hear him when he does Beck stuff.
Yeah, and to be fair,
and his own thing. Obviously,
he really had his own thing too.
Oh, of course,
from the beginning.
Of course,
yeah. Well, and it kind of brings it back to Clapton. Clapton, when he went to the Strat, was definitely the moment when he was moving away from the classic blues stuff. And we're talking about everybody else who was hearkening back to the blues things. Right. But that was Clapton's parting with that. Then, of course, later he's like tweaking the thing to try to get his early tones out of it. And he does, whatever. Did. I guess it's not doing well. It's sad, very sad. But absolutely. That was the parting of the ways, though, for that. But at the same time, he went on to write amazing music through a period of time that I think we all would say was a pretty difficult time to put out a record where there was so much blues. I mean, people still talk about the Journeyman record with great fondness. There's great tones on that, even though they're so identifiable as that decade. Yeah, incredible blues tones, incredible tones coming out of the guitar.
Okay, so out of those three guys, I mean, you know, Beck played a Les Paul at a point.
Sure. Well, early on, and then in the middle of the 70s.
Yeah, the Oxblood, right?
Yeah.
And obviously Clapton.
They all three were burst guys for a while. Because that was the thing. If you didn't have a burst in London in the late 60s, you weren't a guitar player. Right. And I mean, literally all of the guitar players from the three we're talking about to Peter Green, even Martin Barr, like Jethro Tull and lesser band, all of them had sunbursts. Yeah. Or some form of a Les Paul. Yeah. And which harks back to a whole nother segment we could have just about that period alone and how the Les Paul became, you know.
Oh, that would definitely be the Dave show. The 59 burst show is the Dave show.
I'm always asking Dave about Les Pauls, for example. I've been looking for a white custom for forever. And so I called, and I got one, and it was, the headstock was broken.
It's a sad story.
It's a sad story, but
broken again.
But Dave, talk a little bit about that. While we're talking about this, about the white Les Paul Custom, the 74. Yeah, you had
Edge.
No, well, you had Edge, you had Randy Rhoads,
Edge, you had
Lindsey Buckingham played one.
Buckingham. Then
why did they play the white? Because you told me that was the first year that they came out with white. Is that correct?
Yeah, Steve Jones of the Pistols, who got that guitar from Sylvain from the New York Dolls. Yeah.
But what happened? Talk about the maple neck on that. Why did they? Talk about that period, because that's interesting.
Well, the customs were reintroduced in '68. They were basically a one-piece body, two-piece top, mahogany neck.
Yep.
And a three-piece mahogany neck, no volute. So it was very close to the 58-59 custom.
Yeah.
Not quite the same, but close. And then, like in '69, mid-'69, they started changing a few things. The body became a little different. The neck became different. They started putting a volute on in '70. And as every year went by, it got a little less and less of the original design, and they started adding things, and I think personally cheaping some things up.
Yeah.
Sandwiched the body, had 3, 4, 5-piece tops. But in '73, 74, they came out with the white color, which had never been offered on that guitar. Mm-hmm. And they actually did one called a tuxedo, which was cool too. It was a white top, but the back and the neck were black. which is
Right.
which is pretty
Yeah,
rare. You
I've
don't
seen
see
those,
some
yeah.
And but the white ones were I like you. As soon as I saw one, I was like, I love that.
Yeah.
I want one of those. And so yeah, that was an interesting guitar, and unfortunately, we found a really nice one, and then UPS decided they didn't want you to have it, so they just sort of stepped on it.
But then they went to the maple neck.
Yes.
What year? And
yeah, in '75 they went to a maple neck instead of mahogany, which drastically changed the guitar because tonally, it's very different, and actually the neck joint is different too. It has a different dovetail joint under the. It has
and they changed back in '83. Is that right?
Yeah, in 82, 83 they went back to the original design. Actually, when Henry took over the company, they kind of tried to go back to like.
I think that was '83 then.
Yeah, it was 82, 83,
Yeah.
and they they were at least trying to bring it back because everybody. Much like the late 70s Fender stuff of the time, everybody was like, these are junk. So everybody was buying 50s and 60s. That's why the vintage thing went so crazy, because the new stuff was horrible. So Gibson and Fender in the early 80s started kind of getting a clue like, hey, we might need to make some changes here. And they struggled for a while, both companies did. But Gibson got back on track. And I consider a lot of the early mid-80s late 80s stuff to be really good guitars now, and they've actually kind of aged well, and I work on plenty of them, and most of the ones I see are actually still they're still great guitars. So
and talking about Les Pauls with each of these three artists, each of them there's a good story about how they end up with their Les Paul.
Oh yeah,
right. So Page, it's the Joe Walsh guitar, where Joe actually takes the guitar, flies to England, right, and delivers it to Jimmy Page.
Right.
Like, you need to have one of these. Actually, you need to have this one here. and then he's got to be kicking himself all the way back to California. Like, what did I just do?
Well, and
Joe has plenty of guitars.
Joe's gonna say, I think
Joe's in good shape.
Joe's
had a lot of good bursts.
Yeah,
so I think
we don't feel bad.
Joe's
for Joe.
not,
No,
Joe's
no.
not hurting for
But
guitars.
Joe-
Even then, huh?
Joe gave
Clearly.
a lot of great guitars. I mean, he gave Townsend a really killer. I believe it was a 58V. Or it was a Gretsch. I can't remember which one.
Gave.
Yeah, he just was like, oh, I saw this guitar
love Joe.
hanging up. He goes, I just thought of you, and he would give him.
Joe is the best.
Yeah, and we say such bad things about alcohol, and here's the guy just giving away his collection. He's a very giving, gratuitous person. Really lovely. Yeah.
And there again, that's a show we need to have. We need to have a Joe Walsh show too, because he's you talk about
Love
a
Joe.
guy with a career that, much like the three we're talking about, just spanned over so many things and so many bands, and just and is still making really good records today, even in the state
writer.
he's in, or isn't in, whatever,
For what's left.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So
And then the Beck guitar, if I remember right, was a gold top refinished.
Well, Beck had
Oxford or black
he
refinished?
had a early on he had a couple of different bursts, and one of them got stolen, which was a real beautiful top one. It's one of the best looking 59s I've ever seen, and it's very heavy pinstripe, which was pretty unusual for
Really
those.
tight.
Most of them were very plain and weren't that big
Right,
deal.
right.
This one, you can find pictures of it, and just even in black and white pictures, it looks like it's drawn on stripes. They're so, and it got stolen. So I think he did have another one that was plainer that he did strip the top on. It wasn't a gold top. It was a burst, but he stripped it.
Oh, okay.
For some reason.
And then it ended up being like an oxblood that I always thought was black. I mean, that cover of
Well,
Blow
no,
by Blow.
that was a different guitar. The 54
okay.
was a different one completely.
Yeah,
He
that was a black one.
No,
it wasn't black.
No, it was a gold top. It was a 54 wraparound tailpiece gold top that he was going through Memphis, and he actually saw the guitar at St. Blues Music at the time, where actually Clapton used to go and buy guitars. So I suspect they probably talked to each other about that store, and it was Strings and Things. I'm sorry, but they sold St. Blues guitars. But Strings and Things in Memphis had this. He walked in. This guitar that had already been done, I guess. It had been refinished. It had been cut for humbuckers. And I believe Seymour Duncan, who was his tech at the time, and if I get drilled for this, and I know Seymour.
Everybody enjoy this.
Yes.
You can come right after Dave with
Seymour, I believe, bought the guitar at Strings and Things and took it to Jeff because he was his tech and said, hey, I think you dig this. I could be wrong, and if I am, all right, sue me. But that's, as far as I know, Seymour was his tech. I know Seymour definitely was his tech at that time, and that guitar got into his hands because he did want a Les Paul again, and Seymour at the time had routed a 53, 54 Telly for two humbuckers, which has been dubbed the Telly Gib, and traded it to Beck for his famous Yardbirds Esquire.
Right.
And I think at that point, Beck was more into the humbuckers. He was looking for a different sound, much like Beck is. He always tries to push his, okay, well, I've done this to death. What else can I do now? So he was getting into humbuckers for a time. So for like the late 70s period, he was using a lot of humbucker equipped stuff, Telly and Gibson. But yeah, the Oxbow guitar was heavily modified 54 gold
54.
top. And it originally had P90s and a wraparound tailpiece.
And Frampton's was a 54 too, right? His black
custom was.
His custom was. Yeah,
and it was routed.
Which was routed for 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's hard to imagine that people were. I mean, those were new guitars. They're just modifying them.
Or they were old guitars that weren't worth a lot.
Yeah. I mean, in the 70s, those were they were cheap guitars. They weren't expensive. That boom. And the thing about like even the customs and gold tops, they never reached the height of the burst. Mania. So in the 70s, even when bursts were, $1,500, $2,000, you could buy a gold top for like $200, and a custom for about the same because nobody wanted them because they're like, well, that's not the one that everybody wants, So
that's not the
that's
not the Beano guitar,
right?
I don't need that. Right?
Yeah,
that's the Les Paul guitar.
And what's really funny, if I really had to have my druthers, I actually like a wraparound tailpiece on a Les Paul better than like a Tune-o-matic. To me, it sounds much better, much more string to sustain. It's just more live, and I would surmise that's probably why Beck really liked that guitar too, because it really did kind of simulate like a Telly, string through the body.
Yeah,
and so.
Well, and that's always the classic thing they talk about: the burst era guitars sounding like really beefy Tellys.
Yeah. True. And obviously, I think in England, at the time when the Yardbirds were around and all that, it was hard to get those guitars. I think it was more the reason all those guys had Les Pauls was because they couldn't get Fenders. Because really, Fenders at the time, that was the you talk to any of those guys and they were like, I would go and look at this Fender in the window at the shop and could never afford it, so we just started playing all this other stuff we could afford. Because it was the Hank Marvin thing, in England, and so there's a classic interview with Mark Knopfler talking about that where he would, his dream was, if I could just own a red Stratocaster, I don't care if I ever make any more money than that. I just have to have this guitar. And I think all those guys were kind of like that. And so I think the Gibsons got bought up because they were around and they weren't super expensive. And then they started realizing, oh wow, this has got like some kind of tone to it. And especially the Beano record. Obviously, that was the catalyst of and same with the Marshall amps. That was and I think reversed here. You couldn't get Marshalls here.
Right.
And
so that helped the Marshall thing in the States at the time become, So
I know the story of the Les Paul that he plays on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, but I don't know the story of the Beano guitar.
The Beano guitar was Clapton had that Beano guitar for a very brief period. He did the Beano record with it. There was another one that was floating around too that actually I've seen pictures of one that had a Bigsby on it, and I believe it might have been Keith Richards or Mick Taylor's guitar.
Okay.
But the Beano guitar got stolen.
Okay.
And then he went to replace it, and I think Taylor or Richards gave him the one with the Bigsby on it, but they let him borrow it to like do gigs at the Marquee and stuff to get through on some gigs, but they didn't give it to him. They were like, "Well, I want it back," and then and so I think Clapton later on he went and got his other he went the SG 335
right.
So and he had some other guitars too, but those were the main ones, But yeah, the Beano guitar is still to this day not been officially found.
Somebody's got it.
Somebody has
it's like
it.
a lost Van Gogh or something. That's like just incredibly
there's
valuable.
There's a few guys who know where it is and who has it, but it's
Are you one of those guys?
No, but I do know somebody who does know, and he'll never tell me, but he's like, I do know the guitar. I've seen it in person, and we've A/B'd really good photos that we could with grain patterns, and it's the guitar.
Okay, so if anyone out there watching this knows the answer to where that guitar is,
put in the comments.
Tell the comments.
Tell everybody.
We want to know what you think about who the most
and
influential...
if you know where that one is, if you know where Billy Squire's 58 is too, that he got stolen in the 80s, that's another one that has a really high... that one's never been found. Nobody has never come forth on that guitar, and I know Billy has put a huge... reward out for that guitar. Never. It was supposedly an inside job at a studio.
Okay, so that put that in the comments as well. Let us know what you think. Who the most influential rock band of all time was, and
was Creed.
Thank you so much for watching. See you later. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. If you're interested in the Beato book, go to my website at www.rickbeato.com and think about becoming a member of the Beato Club if you want to support the channel even more. Thanks for watching.